Welcome back to another episode of Lineage View. I'm Lineage View, and today we're going to be talking about how you can get a soundboard for your streams. Okay, so what do I mean by soundboard? Are we talking Howard Stern, H3 podcast? It's a little bit different. So the utility for this soundboard is going to be for adding music on the fly whilst you're streaming based on a trigger pad, and you'll also be able to trigger other sound effects at the same time without them cutting each other off unless you want them to. So as a little bit of a backstory, I'm a music producer. I've done this for a very long time, so I've taken a very music producer approach to a soundboard. I've seen a lot of them online. I've seen so many done with proprietary programs and just not very versatile programs to do it on, or things that aren't ideal for getting a soundboard. So this is the way that I've found works best for me. Since I started streaming, I use this every stream and it's super reliable. It's a little bit technical. You don't need any prior knowledge if you follow the instructions in this video. I will be breaking down every step of this process as well to show exactly how I've got each thing set up and what its function is. So here's how I use my soundboard to add another element to my streams with sound effects and music. It just feels a lot more fluid, a lot more cinematic whilst I'm streaming, and here's an example of that just to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Katamari suited perfectly. You know what, it probably did. So, what is broadband? I will show you. At least the way it functions in the UK. Josh, what? Josh Brolin! Josh Brolin! Of course it is! Josh Brolin! Come on! Josh Brolin, this goes out to you, my guy. Thanos. Oh my Jesus. It's almost like the fire's duplicating. Yes, the fire has duplicated. Oh my god. So if you learn anything from this video, please subscribe. It helps me out a ton. So to begin with, let's talk about the cost. Okay, the good news is you won't have to pay for any of the software that we're going to use today. That's the really good part. So I use a Mac for all my music production stuff. However, since starting streaming on a PC, I can't use the same programs I use on a Mac, so I had to find something else. But because digital audio workstations, or DAWs, are really expensive, I didn't want to have to buy another one for my computer. One that I was only really going to be using for this. So I found that a program called Ableton Live 10, is going to be the best option. Now, that is a paid software. However, they have a trial version, which isn't a time-limited trial, it's just with loads of the features taken out. However, everything we're going to be using today is included in this free version. It never expires, you can use it for as long as you want, and it has exactly what we need, so it's perfect. We will be getting into something in a little bit because we do need to download another piece of software, and I will explain why in just a little bit, okay? Everything that I talk about in this video will be linked in the description. Don't look just yet because that'll be confusing. Wait till we get to that part of the video, okay? When I say cost, I simply just mean the cost of the soundboard. Okay, so this is the soundboard that I use. It's the Akai MPD218 professional trigger pad. So the unique thing about this pad is it's designed for finger drumming, playing drums with your fingers, or triggering samples, making beats, that sort of thing. However, I already had this because I bought this because I make lo-fi hip-hop music, so I thought that'd be really handy. Turns out I only really use it for the soundboard these days. So the great thing about this is it's got 16 individual rubberized pads which feel really nice whilst you're playing or whilst you're doing the soundboard. It's very responsive and it's very fast at picking up the signal. Not only does it have 16, but you push this button and it's got 3 different sets. So therefore you have 48 individual sounds that you can technically trigger from. Okay, so let's compare this to something like the Stream Deck or anything like that that's made for this sort of purpose. I don't know if a Stream Deck works like this in this situation. It should be relatively the same thing. The good thing about Ableton is every time you import a track, it makes a cache file, so it can access it a lot quicker. so therefore there's no delays when you push the button on the trigger pad. Again, there are softwares with the Stream Decks that you can do this with. Even this method, you could technically do it with a Stream Deck, but I really wouldn't recommend this. If you were going to do this, the best way to do it is by buying one of these trigger pads. It doesn't have to be this exact one that I've got, so just search for MIDI controller and you'll see ones like this with pads. They all work as long as they're buttons. You could technically probably do this with a keyboard, but it's just doesn't feel the same, you know? So, what's this board for? I'm glad you asked. So, Soundboard. Okay, the pros of it, it's incredibly versatile. It's responsive, you touch it and it plays it straight away. It feels good because it kind of pushes back. There is a lot of resistance when you push it, so you push it and you feel it, you know? And thirdly, it's incredibly reliable. I've not had to change or fix my soundboard at all since I set it up. There's no time where I've had to go in and fix it because something's gone wrong. OBS breaks every time I stream, so this is the one thing that you won't have to worry about. You just save the file and it's good to go. The cons to this is it's expensive. This pad cost me about £70 when I bought it. So it is expensive, it's not cheap, but if you want the best type of feeling when it comes to soundboard, this is the one. It's time consuming, so setting this up, if you've never done this before, may be quite daunting. If you've never used a system like a DAW before, this might be a little bit difficult, but I will be going step by step on everything, so hopefully by the end of this video you'll have exactly what I have. Thirdly, it uses a lot of RAM. So this uses a lot of RAM. So that's something to bear in mind whilst you're considering this project, because it may use 2-3 gig of RAM whilst you're streaming. It's fine because I've got 32 gig of RAM, and it's fine because OBS only uses a little bit, this uses a little bit, you know, but if you've only got 8 or 16, that's quite a lot of real estate to give away to something that's just providing sound effects and music in the background. So if you go to the description, if you download firstly the Ableton Live 10 Lite download, if you install that on your computer, you'll have on the screen what I have here. So again, this is more than what we need for a project like this. First thing, you want to file and then save the project. Save it, Soundboard, or something, just so you know what it is. So the first thing we want to do is, if you go to drums and then go to drum rack, click on it and drag it down. Okay, so bear in mind, ignore all of this. We don't need any of it. All we need to focus on is what's down here. So, what is a drum rack? This, again, is used for making beats for a song. In this case, what we're going to do is we're just going to load it up with samples and music and sound effects, whatever we want to include. This is the way we're going to do it. So if I plug in my MIDI controller now, because I bought one that's by a well-known brand, it's automatically registered by the software. It won't tell you on this page, but on the options page, and then go down to preferences, it will tell you under the bit, click on MIDI. It will say here exactly what type of controller you've got. Make sure that track and remote are both turned on, because that will tell the software when it's playing and when it's not. I'm just going to push one of the pads. So you'll see here. So you can see that it's triggering something along here. So this square here is equating to this square set of pads here. Okay. So when I push one, it plays it. Okay. So it's easy enough. We have a folder here. So we've got some music, we've got some sound effects. So if we drag in a song from Final Fantasy 9, for example, we push the button. So if we do this, and it plays the song, easy enough. However, you'll see there that I had to push the stop button to get it to stop. We'll discuss that in just a little bit. Let's say we want the Final Fantasy music there, and we want the Wii Shop music there, and we've got some sound effects, so we'll drag them in. You know, we've got that and that. Notice here as well, these are the cache files I was talking about, so that will sit there. Don't delete them, because it will mess things up in Ableton, but just leave them where they are. And this is great. If we push buttons, as you heard, multiple songs playing at once, all the sounds playing at once. It's a nightmare. Okay, so This is really up to you and how you choose to do it, but for my streams, I only want, at any point, one song happening at once. Multiple sound effects are fine, which we'll talk about in a minute, but songs, really, you should only want one going on at once, because bear in mind, you might be in the middle of playing a game, and you'll also have the game soundtrack on your stream, unless you've muted it. So therefore, that could be 3 songs going on at once, and that is a nightmare. You might not even see this to begin with, so you might just see this. When you double click on it, it will bring up this. So let's start off by going to Final Fantasy. So you're going to want to start by clicking on this one, and this will bring up this screen here. So you don't really need any of these, but there's something else that's hidden at the moment that we need, and it's a thing called choke. What choke does is it will only allow one thing to play at once, or 2 things to allow, playing at once. It's really important in this case. So click on this I/O button, and that loads up this choke setting. So on the Final Fantasy music and the Wii Shop music, bear in mind, make sure you title these, because it'll be really annoying to go back in without the titles. If we set this to choke 1, and if we set Wii Shop music to choke 1, if we play 1 to begin with, and then we play the other, it silences it, which is perfect. However, we're still having to press the stop button every time we want it to stop, and also it's not working as soon as I push the button because there's a delay. Why is there a delay? Well, we'll deal with that first. So if you click on the Final Fantasy one, for example, it should start the second I push the button, but it doesn't. Look, there's a delay. We don't want that at all, okay? Click and drag down to zoom into the audio file. Make sure you're selecting the right one first. Click and drag down, and simply just click on this flag and move it closer. It doesn't have to be perfect, because these are like nanoseconds we're dealing with here, but just enough. So now when we press it, it does it straight away. We do the same thing for every sound effect we put in. We need to make sure that it starts exactly when we want it to. Now, this doesn't have to be at the beginning. You can do this at any part of the song. You can have it come in whenever you want. Just make sure that it starts, and you keep testing it to make sure it fits fine. So again, starts exactly when I want it to. Perfect. And we're going to do the same thing for these sound effects here, and we just start it when the sound effect starts. Exactly. We'll talk about the volume in just a moment. For the time being, these sound effects are not on the same choke, so you may think that we want to put this on choke 1, when in fact we don't, because if we put this onto choke 1, the sound effects will cut off the music. We want a layer of music and a layer of sound effects completely separate of each other. We want to be able to play sound effects on top of the music. We're going to set this to choke 2 and choke 2. However, if we play music with both of those sound effects being on the same choke channel, if you play one sound effect and then another, but the previous one is still going on, you're going to cut off the previous sound effect. So for smaller sound effects, it's not such a problem, but when you've got longer ones, you want them each on their own individual choke channels, just because you're never going to cut them off. So that's really important to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind as well is every time I'm stopping this, I have to push the stop button. It's not what I want to do. So if you go to the link in the description, here's a silent sound that I've made. If you download that, we drag that in. I always put it on this one because that's the closest one to me, and it's great to be able to turn it off. Now, we're not stopping the sounds. I'm not having to push any buttons on my keyboard. What I've done is you take the silence and you put it onto choke 1. So you're not technically stopping the music, you're just overriding a song with the sound of silence. For example, you play the Final Fantasy song and it stops it, and it works absolutely perfectly. It's really easy to do. It's a really great workaround. Rather than having to mess around with some macro to get one button on here to work, it's not worth it. Just play silence. Again, this doesn't work the same with sound effects because it's only on the choke 1 channel. Again, with sound effects though, you don't have to worry as much about them because they typically are only smaller sound effects anyway. So that's something to consider. So it's important when you're working with the different songs. If you press this IO button again, you'll get that to collapse and you'll see it. Make sure you click on this volume feature. Now, there's no set in stone way to do this, but you bring up the volume and you adjust it to taste. So if one sounds much louder than another, because songs get mixed and mastered differently, some will naturally be louder than others. You just need to level them out. You need to make sure that they sound about right, you know? Especially with the sound effects. These are visibly, because this is much more narrow, they're much quieter. So you push that and it's louder. If you turn it down, it's much quieter. So it's really, really easy to do this. Now bear in mind, there's something here, there's your master channel. So you should really just leave this where it is, set at 0. Don't crank these up all the way because it's just going to clip on here. If it clips, it sounds distorted when you output it through OBS. So I would say just try and make them all sound around the same, but this shouldn't be red at all like this. If that's red, it's going past the 0, so whenever you output that, it's just going to be distortion. So make sure when you're pushing these sound effects that they're not in the red, make sure they're all in the green and they're all about the same level. Okay? You may have followed this tutorial step by step and you've paused it and you've gone to go and try it in OBS and you've been there for ages and you can't seem to get this signal from Ableton to go through to OBS. So the audio driver that you should be using is the ASIO for All driver. So that has the lowest latency, the best bit rate on output. So that is really the best one you could be using. However, every DAW that I've ever used doesn't output to OBS. The only one that does is FL Studio. This is where it gets a little bit complicated. Just stick with me here. So for the soundboard, we're going to be completely using Ableton. However, there is a link in the description to download FL Studio Trial. You'll need to download this because when you install it, it comes with FL Studio ASIO for All. It may just be called FL Studio ASIO. That's the one I use. That's the only one that will let you output to OBS through it. For some reason, that's the only ASIO driver that actually responds to the desktop audio. It doesn't make any sense. Trust me, if there was an easier way, I would have done it. I've tried every method, I promise you. Once you've downloaded FL Studio, installed it, you won't actually need it after that, so if you choose to uninstall it, that's fine. Just make sure it doesn't uninstall FL Studio ASIO. But what you'll need to do is go to Options, go down to Preferences, click on Audio, and make sure it says FL Studio ASIO. That way, it will come through OBS, and that will all work seamlessly, okay? And I think that's about it. So you can add sounds whenever you want. You just need to make sure that you're saving the soundboard. I would recommend whenever you add new sounds, if you do a few in one go, save it as a different file, just so you've got an incremental backup, you know, going forward. I would say if you do need to add sound effects, there's absolutely no shame in coming back to this video because there is quite a lot to take in one go here if you've never used software like this. Again, you don't need to even consider 90% of what's on the screen. It's just along the bottom. That's all we really need this particular bit for. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you learned anything at all, please leave a like. Please subscribe for more content like this. If you've got any questions, anything you got stuck on, please leave a comment down below. I would love to help. Anyway guys, thank you so much for tuning in and I will see you next time. See you later.